Greetings. I am Dr. Hassiem Mayali Kimbui. I am an associate professor at the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and I wanted to come on real briefly and share with you my thoughts regarding the discussion around a documentary series that has been released on Netflix, executive produced by Jada Pinkett Smith, regarding African history and learning about African queens. And so there has been a discussion over the last few months about one of the installments and Cleopatra, an Egyptian pharaoh, and her identity. I wanted to really wait to hear what some of the scholars and researchers and teachers have been saying in the community before I make my comment. And so, after hearing what has been shared, many of them are saying the same thing, and that is that Cleopatra was not white. However, my claim is that Cleopatra was indeed white. Dr. Kimbui, what do you mean? You're not making sense. You don't know nothing about African history. Allow me to elucidate my point or make clear my point. In doing so, I want to share with you two examples. The first example pertains to a brother on YouTube by the name of Dr. Umar Johnson or Dr. Umar Ifotunde. The brother is well known in the community. He goes out and lectures and presents, primarily dealing with his effort to address the needs of our students to education. And in doing so, he is building an educational institution of his own in regards to teaching and learning, or in regards to the teaching and learning of African American male and female students. And so, how I know of the brother is because of that on YouTube, in which he's gone out and promoted the school, which he plans to name after two well-known ancestors among African people in America, and that's Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey. And so, in one of his video presentations and promoting the educational institutions named after them, he spoke about a situation that occurred where he was out at a venue, at a lecture or discussion perhaps, and the question was raised by two young children. They voiced to him, Dr. Umar Ifatunde, why are you naming your school after two white people? And Dr. Umar Ifatunde, in his response, shared, oh no, I'm not naming the school after white people. These two people who he was referring to, Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey, are the most bluest, blackest people in history. Um, that was the gist of what he was saying. I don't recall the exact words. However, that question went over his head, and as well as perhaps the people that were there at the venue that heard the question. However, as an Afrocentrist, it didn't go over my head. I knew exactly what the students were saying. And that point is this, and this, the point of me using this example is not, it doesn't have anything to do with Dr. Umar Ifatunde per se, or Frederick Douglass or Marcus Garvey. The fact of the matter is that those names, Marcus Garvey and Frederick Douglass, are white names. So when the students formulating their question and asking the question in their mind, those names that are associated with white people that in turn are associated with this institution. So that is what they were referring to. And so that also applies in this case and how I formulated my conclusion about the identity of Cleopatra. Cleopatra is a white Greek name. Therefore, Cleopatra was white. The same can be said as another example dealing with those black Christians, for example, or those Christians who take God Jesus, which Jesus is following the same line of thought. Jesus is a Roman white name. How they take God Jesus and go into the Christian scripture and use scripture to associate God Jesus with being black or African. It's the same thing. And so that is how I reached the conclusion of how Cleopatra is white. There was no confusion, and for me, no need to debate. As an Afrocentrist, it was clear. And this really speaks to where our focus therefore should be. And that is in the power of self-definition, being able to define yourself. And not only that, but being able to see how that applies within historical record, as I just provided you an example, two examples of, to the most recent example dealing with this whole argument of the identity of Cleopatra. And in many ways, this is not separate from the argument being formed in the first place, where you have Africans on the continent who don't even identify as African. In this instance, they identify as Arabs, or I should say more specifically, white Arabs, right? And we have the same here in the situation where you have a number of African individuals and groups viewing and calling themselves foundational Black Americans, African descendants of slaves. You even have some imaginary, they're making up imaginary names as being called Black Jews or Black Hebrews. You hear the term Moor, or entirely as a whole nother race in and of itself, as those on the continent are claiming to be white Arabs. They identify as Native Americans. So you see, we that is the larger issue and ties into this idea of, even though as a people and well, as individuals and people, we are separate, we're still mentally integrated in that way. And because of the similarities of consequences really reflects truly on what Carter G. Woodson had talked about in terms of controlling somebody's thinking. So we're mentally integrated and controlled in our thinking, for example, as it pertains to race and ethnicity. Now, I'm going to get into another discussion, a video talking about that part and dealing with this idea about race, because that is another issue that has been brought up in the forefront dealing with this, and that we really have to get control of. But then guess what? It goes back to this whole thing about the power of self-definition. And so many of us, because of the thought that's embedded in our mind about race, we don't many don't see the ability to be able to define our own race and be able to accept who we are as Africans. We'll be anything but that. And so I'm going to go into that. But for the for the purposes of this video, I just wanted to share my thoughts and comments pertaining to the identity of Cleopatra and why indeed Cleopatra was white. Thank you for listening. And again, just look forward for other videos coming up here very, very shortly. Thank you.